Good morning, John. The Project for Awesome yearly charity live stream begins today, mere moments and perhaps hours from when I am uploading this video. I don't know when I'm going to push publish. Everyone, thank you for 19 years of the Project for Awesome. We'll see what gets done this year. I'm sure it'll be super chill and not weird at all. And also thank you for your patience. We're using a number of different systems this year, sometimes by choice, sometimes by necessity. We're learning. You might have seen the website break a little bit yesterday, but now it's fixed. We have already raised $88,000 at the Tiltify. You can see a bunch of the stuff. There's the unsigned fish print bundle. That's right, we're doing fish prints. We hired an amazing artist to make customized fish prints for all of our guests, including me. There's the Nerdfighter art perk. There's an exclusive Hank's channel video. There's the first chapter of my book audio version. There's the PDF version of Zombicorns. We're bringing back Zombicorns audio version of Zombicorns. There's the Dear Hank and John exclusive, the Delete This exclusive, the John and Sarah podcast exclusive, the Anthropocene reviewed exclusive. There's the Dadcast. There's a lot of good digital downloads, and they're all in that bundle. Look at all of these cool things. I just made a bunch of work for myself. Also, if you are a Focus Friend user, you can get the Baked Beans bean. He's so wet, but he wants someone to love him, and all of the money from that goes to the Project for Awesome. And then that money will go to charities, because during the P4A we raise money for a charity. And these organizations are something. They're a thing, right? They're charities. They're nonprofits. They're like businesses that are not for profit, but people can give their money to them and they don't have to pay taxes, maybe. This sounds good. John, Complexly, a company that we founded together 15 years ago, just became a nonprofit organization. It went from being a business to being a nonprofit, and we think that was a good idea. And during that process, it turns out I had a lot of thoughts about what a nonprofit actually is. And at one point, I remember myself asking, actually, why doesn't everybody do this? And there's reasons. But before we talk about them, I want to talk about why some people do it. Why is it advantageous for some organizations to be organized this way? Like, an organization focused on doing good in the world doesn't have to be a nonprofit. It can be a business. Now, we're going to be limiting our conversation to the US here because this is a legal thing and the law is different in different places, but there is a way to be organized under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. That's why it's called a 501c3 nonprofit. And organizations that fit all the requirements, they do not have to pay federal income taxes on the profit that they generate. Now, that's a weird sentence because nonprofits, you would think that they wouldn't have profit. But they do, kind of. They can have what's called a surplus. And in fact, most nonprofits strive to have a surplus because otherwise you're right at zero, and that's a precarious place to be. If more is going out than is coming in, that's a problem long term. So you want there to be more money coming in than going out, at least a little bit, so that you have some buffer. And if you're a not-for-profit organization, you don't have to pay taxes on that surplus. And there's a reason why. And I would never have thought about this if I hadn't been in this situation I have been in for the last year, thinking about whether to do this with Complexly. But we're not going to talk about it yet. First, we're going to talk about the second big perk of being a nonprofit, which is the ability to receive tax-deductible donations. So when a person, or also a corporation, because corporations are, of course, people, donate money to a 501c3 organization, they often can deduct that amount from their own taxable income, lowering their personal tax bill. So they lower the amount of income that is taxable, and that gives them an incentive to give. I often find that what this means is pretty misunderstood. So let us imagine a person who's doing real good. They make $250,000 a year, and they give away $50,000 of it to Complexly last year. So thank you to that person. You gave us a fifth of your income. This is a hypothetical, obviously. But they would still pay taxes on all $250,000 of their income, so they would pay those taxes, which I did some back of the napkin math, would be around $55,000. So they would give the $50,000, and then they'd also pay the $55,000 in taxes, and that would leave them with about $145,000. But if they give us the $50,000 this year, now that we're a nonprofit 501c3, the $50,000 would reduce their taxable income to the $200,000 left after their donation. And that would mean that they would pay around $42,000, leaving them instead with $158,000. And so this person who's doing well, who's extraordinarily generous and really loves Complexly, in the old world, after giving us $50,000, they would have $145,000. In the new world, after giving us $50,000, they have $158,000. And then there's another big advantage to being a nonprofit, which is that nonprofits often give you access to grants and public public funds that are simply not available to for-profits. Lots of foundations and government agencies have mandates to only give grants to registered nonprofits. This is, for example, how the Project for Awesome works. So nonprofits are not like companies that don't make money. Nonprofits can make tons of money. They can have significant surpluses. Hospitals, universities, the NFL was a nonprofit until 2015. I think San Diego Comic-Con is a nonprofit. I Googled it. They are. The difference is not that they don't make money. The difference is what happens with that money. And that leads us into one of the main reasons that companies tend to not be nonprofits. The only reason a nonprofit organization does not pay taxes on its surpluses is that those surpluses cannot leave the organization and go to a person. And businesses tend to be set up with the idea that the profits will go to a person. So if you start a company, you sell a product, the money comes in, you pay your employees, you pay your rent, you pay for your supplies, whatever is left over, that's your profit. And that is what you take home as the owner. That's like the majority of the way owners make money. They can often also pay themselves salaries, but the idea is that the real money comes from the profit. And that's taken as a profit distribution according to the ownership of the company from the assets of the company. That's the owner's money. They made it. Even if it's still sitting in the corporation, legally, it has to be taxed because it's kind of their money. And there's annoyingly different ways for organizations to be set up and the tax implications are different, but don't worry about that. And if you're a nonprofit, the reason that money isn't taxed is because you cannot take that money. That is the organization's money and it can only be spent on the organization's mission. But the value here to the owners is not just about the profit that comes out. Your company also has value as a thing in itself. You can sell it or you can sell a part of it. You can sell shares. You can sell equity. You could say to an investor, hey, you can have 10% of my company for some money and then I'm going to use that money to grow the business. And they'll say yes because they think it's a pretty good bet that the company will be worth more in the future. And this is the thing that funds a lot of businesses. And also you can give your employees equity as part of their compensation. Like when you're trying to recruit people into your business to help grow your business, they might say, oh, why would I go work for you? I could start my own thing. It was like, oh, well, maybe you can get a piece of this thing and it's already got a big head start and they come in and they get a piece of it and that piece gets more valuable. With a nonprofit organization, you don't get to do that. There are no owners. There is no equity. Nobody has a stake to sell. Any money in the organization stays in the organization, has to go back to the mission. Employees don't have a piece of it. There's no potential to someday have a big windfall. That's not what's happening anymore. And I feel like I didn't really need to say any of that, but yeah, that's why most businesses are businesses, because the reason they start the business is not to just do a good thing in the world. I think many businesses think of that as part of their mission, but the primary thing that they're doing is they want the incentive to make money for themselves. And that means that part of the way that they make their money is when the business makes money and then they take that money out. And that cannot happen with a nonprofit. But this is not the only reason. Even if you wanted, most businesses cannot be nonprofits. That part of the tax code, 501c3, it tells you that there are specific exempt purposes, like reasons for your organization to exist that mean that you can be one of these organizations. Charitable, educational, scientific, religious, literary. There's things you're supposed to be doing that theoretically serve the public good in some defined way. And the most interesting case study here for me is, of course, Good Store. At Good.Store, everything that you buy, soap, coffee, tea, underpants, you're buying a product that I think you will love, that you'll probably love, and you'll come back and buy it more later. And then all of the profit gets donated to charity. But Good.Store makes money by selling socks, and selling socks is not an exempt purpose. Yeah, your feet feel nicer if you have socks, but that's not what nonprofits are for. It's not really a charity. So Good Store has to be a for-profit company that pays taxes on all of its profit, but then instead of distributing that profit to owners, it donates it. We would love for it to be a nonprofit organization, but it cannot be a nonprofit organization because the thing that generates its revenue is not an exempt purpose. Now, there's also a few other things here. There's paperwork, which is non-trivial, especially for a smaller organization. And then there's a weird reason that I haven't heard anybody say ever, but I ran into it, which is that the world is built for what exists, and most organizations are for-profit businesses. So the number of lawyers that work in for-profit are just way more of them than work in non-profit. You have to find a specialized lawyer rather than a regular lawyer. Now, it's not that much harder because there are a lot of nonprofits, but there are also some weirder ways to organize where this does become a big hurdle. All of the infrastructure of America, including the tax code, is set up for things to be done a certain way. and most things are done one way as businesses, and a smaller, significantly smaller hunk is done as nonprofits, but a big enough hunk that most of the infrastructure is there. But I will say, as far as converting a for-profit to a nonprofit, there weren't a lot of lawyers that had experience in that, and once we found one, it was much easier. So yeah, the answer to this question is probably mostly what you expected, but there are some real challenges to being a nonprofit, including you might not legally be able to. But usually organizations that should be nonprofits, in fact, are, and the ones that shouldn't be, in fact, are not. Which is why something like the Project for Awesome is possible. John, I'll see you in mere moments on the live stream. We're going to have a very good time. It's going to be very weird. Again, you can get that baked beans bean for Focus Friend if that's your jam. You can donate at projectforawesome.com/donate. There's all kinds of cool perks there. You can vote at projectforawesome.com. You can watch the live stream right here on Vlogbrothers or at projectforawesome.com/live. Thank you, John. I'll see you momentarily.